I spilled a coffee on a Tuesday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon, I was unemployed. That's the short version. Here's the long one. The one where you find out exactly whose building he fired me in. My name doesn't matter yet. What matters is that 11 months ago, I walked into a glass office tower on the corner of 5th and Main, wearing a blazer. I bought secondhand, carrying a coffee. I'd made it home because $8 for a latte felt like a crime. I was starting as a marketing coordinator. Entry-level title, senior-level workload, like always. My new boss was a man named Richard Colton. Tall, silver hair, the kind of handshake that lingers a half-second too long, like he needs you to know. He decided how firm it would be. Richard ran that floor like a kingdom. He had opinions about everything. How loud you typed, whether you smiled enough in meetings, whether your lunch smelled too strong for the break room. I learned fast that survival meant making myself small. So I did. I answered emails within 4 minutes. I stayed late without being asked. I laughed at jokes that weren't funny. I told myself it was temporary, that I was building something, that eventually the ceiling would crack and I'd get through it. What Richard didn't know, what almost nobody in that building knew, was where I came from before I put on that secondhand blazer. 3 years earlier, my grandmother passed away and left me something nobody expected her to have. A stake in a commercial, property-holding company her late husband built from nothing in the 70s. Not headlines, not champagne-popping wealth, just quiet ownership, tucked into a trust with my name on it, managed by lawyers who filed paperwork twice a year and otherwise left me alone. I didn't grow up rich. I grew up watching my mother count coupons at the kitchen table. So when that inheritance landed, I didn't quit anything, didn't buy anything flashy, didn't tell a soul at work. I kept renting my 1-bedroom. I kept clipping my own coupons, if I'm honest. Money like that didn't feel like mine to spend. It felt like mine to protect. So I let the lawyers manage it, and I went back to building a career the regular way, because I wanted to know I could. I had no idea when I signed my offer letter that the trust owned the very building. I'd be reporting to every morning at 8:45. I found out by accident, actually, 6 months in, flipping through a property tax document my accountant sent for my signature. I saw the address before I saw anything else, 5th and Main. I sat there staring at it for a full minute, coffee going cold, feeling like the floor had quietly tilted 2 degrees under my chair. I didn't say anything. What was there to say? Hi, Richard. Fun fact, my family trust technically owns the walls around you. That's not a sentence you casually drop in a Monday stand-up. So I filed it away, the way you file away a fact that feels too big and too strange to be useful yet. I kept doing my job. I kept being invisible on purpose. Richard, meanwhile, kept being exactly who he was. The morning it happened, I was carrying 2 coffees, mine and one for my coworker Dana, who'd been up all night with a sick kid and looked like she was running, on fumes and spite. I was cutting through the executive hallway, which employees weren't technically supposed to use. But the elevator on our side was out, and I was late for a meeting. Richard himself had moved up by 20 minutes without telling half the team. I turned a corner too fast. Richard turned the same corner from the opposite direction, mid-sentence on a phone call, and we collided hard enough that both coffees went straight down the front of his $3,000 suit. For a second, nobody moved. Dana's coffee dripped off his lapel in slow motion. I said I was so sorry. I grabbed napkins from the little table by the elevators. I was already apologizing before my brain had finished processing what happened. Richard didn't yell. That was almost worse. He just looked at the stain spreading across his shirt, looked at me and said, in this flat, terrifyingly calm voice, "Clean out your desk." I actually laughed at first because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He said I'd been a liability since day one, that this was the final straw in a pattern of carelessness, that HR would have my paperwork by end of day. 11 months of 4-minute email replies and staying late and swallowing my dignity in staff meetings, and it ended over $4 of coffee I'd made in my own kitchen. I stood in that hallway with wet hands and a security badge that would stop working in about 6 hours, and something in me went very, very still. I didn't argue with him. I want you to understand that. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't remind him of every deadline I'd hit or every project I'd saved. I just nodded, said okay, and walked back to my desk to pack up a stapler and a photo of my dog, because I already knew something Richard didn't. I knew what was coming for him, and I wanted him to enjoy the next few days thinking he'd won. It took exactly 9 days. On the 9th day, Richard walked into work to Find a notice on the building's main entrance, the kind that goes out to every tenant on the property when ownership initiates a management review. Standard paperwork, technically. Except this particular review had my signature on it. Because for the first time in 3 years, I picked up the phone and called my own lawyers myself, instead of letting them run things quietly in the background. I told them I wanted a full audit of every department lease in that building, starting with the marketing floor's management structure. I told them I wanted to know exactly how Richard Colton treated the people under him, the turnover numbers, the HR complaints that quietly disappeared, the unpaid overtime nobody logged because they were scared to. I didn't gloat. I want to be clear about that, because it would have been so easy to gloat. I just laid it out plainly, the way he'd laid out my firing to me in that hallway. I told him the trust was restructuring management, oversight for the marketing division, effective immediately. I told him his contract as director was being reviewed alongside everyone else's. The difference being that his review came with 3 years of documented complaints attached, and mine came with a coffee stain and a 4-second apology he never let me finish. He didn't say a single word for almost a full minute. I watched him do the math in real time. My last name, the trust's name, the building's name. Watched the color actually leave his face when it clicked. Then he asked very quietly if there was anything he could do. I told him that was an interesting question to ask now, considering he never once asked it when it was Dana, crying in the stairwell, after he screamed at her for a typo, or when Marcus quit without notice because Richard humiliated him in front of clients. I told him this wasn't personal. It was accountability, arriving 9 days late instead of 11 months. He was let go within the month. Not by me, I made sure of that. Made sure it went through the proper board process, documented and clean, so nobody could ever call it a vendetta. But everyone in that building knew exactly why it happened, and exactly whose coffee had started it. As for me, I didn't stay in marketing. I didn't need to prove anything to that floor anymore. I stepped quietly into a seat on the board I'd been avoiding for 3 years, because I finally understood something my grandmother probably knew the whole time she was watching me clip coupons and pretend I was just like everyone else. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay small on purpose. Let people underestimate exactly what you're capable of, and let them find out the truth on your timeline, not theirs. Richard fired me over a coffee spill. He should have asked whose name was on the deed first.